Have you ever felt like you're still figuring out who you are, even though everyone says you should have it all together by now? Like you're supposed to be a fully formed adult, but something inside still feels unfinished, uncertain, searching. Science just discovered why. Your brain doesn't become an adult until you're 32 years old, and everything you thought you knew about growing up was wrong. For decades, we've lived under a collective delusion. Society told us that 18 marked the threshold of adulthood. Legal systems declared us adults at that age. Parents expected maturity. Employers demanded professionalism. But your brain, the 3-pound universe inside your skull that determines who you are, how you think, what you become, was still under construction, still rewiring, still fundamentally adolescent, and it stays that way until you turn 32. This isn't speculation. This isn't self-help philosophy or pop psychology. This is neuroscience, published in November 2025 by researchers at the University of Cambridge in one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals, Nature Communications. The study analyzed brain scans from 3,802 people ranging from newborns to 90-year-olds, creating the most comprehensive map of human brain development ever produced. What they discovered rewrites our understanding of human maturation. The human brain doesn't develop linearly. It doesn't gradually mature from birth to 20 and then plateau. Instead, it moves through 5 distinct structural epochs, separated by 4 dramatic turning points that occur at ages 9, 32, 66, and 83. Each epoch represents a fundamentally different way your brain organizes itself, processes information, and constructs your sense of reality. The most shocking revelation? The adolescent epoch, that turbulent period we associate with teenagers making impulsive decisions, struggling with identity, experiencing emotional volatility, doesn't end when you finish high school. It doesn't end when you graduate college. It doesn't end when you get your first real job or move into your own apartment. It continues, actively reshaping your brain's architecture until approximately age 32. Think about what this means. Every decision you made in your 20s was made with an adolescent brain. Every relationship, every career choice, every moment of self-doubt or sudden clarity. You weren't failing at adulthood. You were still biologically becoming an adult. The research team, led by Dr. Alexa Mosley, used a sophisticated imaging technique called diffusion MRI to track how the brain's white matter, the neural highways that connect different regions, develops and changes across the lifespan. White matter consists of myelinated nerve fibers that allow different parts of your brain to communicate efficiently. The more organized and robust these connections become, the better your brain functions as an integrated system. What they discovered was extraordinary. During the adolescent epoch, which begins around age 9 and extends to 32, the brain undergoes its most efficient period of neural reorganization. This is the only phase of human life when neural efficiency actively increases. Your brain is building better highways, creating more direct routes between regions, optimizing the flow of information in ways that will define your cognitive abilities for the rest of your life. But here's what makes 32 such a pivotal age. The research identified it as the single most dramatic structural turning point across the entire human lifespan. Around age 32, your brain experiences what the researchers call the most directional changes in wiring and largest overall shift in trajectory compared to every other transitional moment in your life. Bigger than the shift at 9, bigger than the changes at 66 or 83. Age 32 represents the moment your brain completes its adolescent architecture and locks into an adult configuration. This explains so much about the subjective experience of being human. Why do so many people report feeling like they finally figured things out, in their early 30s. Why does personality research show that traits stabilize around this age? Why do people in their 30s often describe a sense of clarity or groundedness that eluded them in their 20s? It's not psychological, it's neurological. Your brain literally wasn't finished yet. The 5 epochs identified in the study each have distinct characteristics that correspond to our lived experience. The first epoch, from birth to age 9, represents rapid but chaotic growth. During this childhood phase, your brain is pruning synaptic connections, learning what to keep and what to discard, establishing the fundamental architecture that will support everything that comes later. It's a period of explosive development, but not yet refined efficiency. Then comes the adolescent epoch, from 9 to 32. This is where things get fascinating. During these 23 years, your brain is engaged in what neuroscientists call large-scale construction. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive function, decision-making, impulse control, and long-term planning, is still maturing. The connections between emotional centers like the amygdala and rational centers like the prefrontal cortex are still being refined and strengthened. This has profound implications for understanding behavior during this period. When a 15-year-old makes an impulsive decision, we recognize it as typical adolescent behavior. But we don't extend the same understanding to a 25-year-old, even though their brain is still in the same developmental epoch. We expect them to have adult judgment, adult emotional regulation, adult impulse control. But neurologically, they're still adolescents. Dr. Mosley emphasizes that neural efficiency is, as you might imagine, well connected by short paths. And the adolescent era is the only one in which this efficiency is increasing. During your 20s, your brain is actively becoming better at being a brain. It's optimizing, it's refining, it's not finished. The transition at 32 ushers in the third epoch, adulthood, which spans from approximately 32 to 66. This is the longest developmental period, lasting more than 3 decades, and it's characterized by relative stability. The dramatic reorganization stops. The architecture is set. This is when personality and intelligence plateau, not because growth ends, but because the fundamental structure supporting those traits has stabilized. Research on personality development has long shown that traits become more consistent in the 30s. The big 5 personality dimensions, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, fluctuate significantly in the teens and 20s, but settle into more predictable patterns after 30. Now, we understand why. It's not that people suddenly decide to be more stable. It's that the neural infrastructure supporting personality has finished its adolescent reorganization. The implications for mental health are staggering. Most psychiatric disorders emerge during the adolescent epoch. Depression, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, eating disorders, addiction. The majority of these conditions have their onset between the ages of 15 and 30. This isn't coincidental. It's because the brain is in its most vulnerable state during this period. The neural networks that regulate mood, process stress, manage fear, and control impulses are still under construction. They're malleable, which means they're both adaptable and fragile. This is particularly important for understanding substance use. The research team, including Dr. Mark Gold, who analyzed the implications of these findings, notes that early substance exposure during the adolescent epoch can permanently alter developmental trajectories. When you introduce alcohol, nicotine, cannabis, or other drugs to a brain that's actively engaged in large-scale neural construction, you're not just causing temporary impairment. You're potentially changing the blueprint. Studies have shown that the earlier someone begins using addictive substances, the higher their lifetime risk of developing a substance use disorder. We used to think this was purely behavioral or psychological. Now we understand it's also neurobiological. If you begin drinking heavily at 16, you're introducing a neurotoxic substance during a critical period when your brain's reward circuits, impulse control systems, and stress response networks are still being wired. Those systems may then develop differently than they would have in the absence of chronic substance exposure. The same principle applies to other experiences during the adolescent epoch. Chronic stress, trauma, sleep deprivation, nutrition, all of these environmental factors can influence how your brain completes its developmental trajectory. The adolescent brain is a work in progress, which means it's particularly sensitive to both positive and negative influences. But here's the hopeful part. That same plasticity means the adolescent brain is also primed for positive change. This is when therapy is most effective, when new habits are most easily formed, when you can literally rewire maladaptive patterns before they become structurally entrenched. The window for intervention doesn't close at 18 or 25. It stays open until 32. The fourth epoch begins around 66 with what the researchers call early aging. This transition is more subtle than the shift at 32. The brain doesn't undergo dramatic reorganization, but there are meaningful changes in network organization. White matter integrity begins to decline. The connections that were so efficiently optimized during adolescence start to show wear. This doesn't mean cognitive collapse. Many people remain sharp well into their 90s, but it represents a shift from stability to gradual decline. The final epoch emerges around 83, when the brain enters late aging. Neural connections degrade more noticeably. The brain begins relying more on local networks rather than global integration. This is when we see the cognitive changes we associate with advanced age: slower processing speed, difficulty with complex reasoning, memory challenges. But even here, there's enormous individual variability. Some brains age more gracefully than others, influenced by genetics, lifestyle, continued learning, social engagement, and countless other factors. Understanding these epochs helps us make sense of our own life trajectories. How many people look back at their early 20s and cringe at decisions that seemed reasonable at the time? How many relationships formed in that period felt intense and significant, but ultimately weren't sustainable? How many career paths seemed perfect until suddenly, in your early 30s, you realize they weren't aligned with who you actually are? These aren't personal failures. They're the natural consequence of making long-term decisions with a brain that was still figuring out its permanent configuration. The research also challenges societal structures built around outdated assumptions about brain development. We allow people to vote at 18, join the military at 18, take on massive student debt at 18, all based on a legal definition of adulthood that neuroscience now reveals is premature. The brain making those decisions is still adolescent in its structure and function. This doesn't mean we should raise the age of majority to 32. That would be impractical and infantilizing. But it does suggest we should provide more scaffolding, more support, more understanding during the 20s than we currently do. Young adults shouldn't be expected to have everything figured out. They're not neurologically equipped to have everything figured out, and that's okay. The study also illuminates why certain experiences feel so formative during specific periods. The relationships you form in your late teens and 20s often carry disproportionate emotional weight, not because they were objectively more significant than later relationships, but because they occurred during a period when your brain was maximally plastic and receptive to environmental shaping. Those neural pathways were still being laid down. Those experiences literally became part of your brain's architecture in ways that later experiences cannot. Similarly, Trauma experienced during the adolescent epoch can have particularly profound and lasting effects. A 30-year-old who experiences a traumatic event will process and integrate that experience with a structurally mature brain. A 22-year-old processing the same event is doing so with a brain that's still under construction. The trauma doesn't just create a memory, it potentially influences how the developing neural networks organize themselves. But let's return to that magical age of 32 because it deserves special attention. The researchers describe this turning point as uniquely powerful. After 23 years of active neural reorganization, your brain finally settles into its adult configuration. The efficiency gains plateau. The personality stabilizes. The fundamental way you process information, regulate emotions, make decisions, and construct meaning becomes relatively fixed. This isn't the end of change. You can still learn new skills, form new relationships, have new insights. But the underlying neural architecture supporting those experiences is now stable in a way it wasn't before. The foundation is set. You're building on solid ground rather than shifting sand. Many people report that their 30s feel qualitatively different from their 20s in ways they struggle to articulate. They describe feeling more themselves, more confident in their choices, less buffeted by external opinions, more able to set boundaries, more clear about their values and priorities. Now we know why. It's not just increased life experience, it's neurodevelopmental completion. This research also offers a compassionate reframing of the quarter-life crisis, that period of intense anxiety and uncertainty that often strikes in the mid to late 20s. We've pathologized it, treated it as a modern phenomenon caused by economic instability or social media or delayed milestones. But perhaps it's a neurobiological phenomenon. Perhaps it's what happens when an adolescent brain approaches the end of its developmental trajectory and begins the transition to adult configuration. Perhaps the disorientation people feel is the subjective experience of profound neural reorganization. The findings have implications for education, career development, mental health treatment, criminal justice, and countless other domains. If the brain remains adolescent until 32, should we rethink how we structure professional development for people in their 20s? Should we expect less stability in career paths during this period? Should we provide more mentorship and support rather than expecting immediate expertise and commitment? For mental health professionals, this research suggests that interventions during the adolescent epoch, which now extends to 32, may have particularly powerful effects. Therapy isn't just treating symptoms, it's potentially influencing the developmental trajectory of a still maturing brain. Cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness practices, trauma processing, all of these interventions may literally shape how the brain completes its adolescent reorganization. The study also raises questions about individual variation. While 32 is the average age for this major turning point, the researchers acknowledge that there's variability. Some people may complete their adolescent development earlier, others later. Genetics, environment, health, stress, nutrition, sleep, relationships, substance use, all of these factors influence the pace and quality of brain development. There's also the question of cultural differences. The researchers note that their findings apply most clearly to populations in Western countries like the United Kingdom and the United States. Brain development may follow different trajectories in cultures, with different environmental pressures, different social structures, different experiences of adolescence and young adulthood. What does this mean for you, personally right now, reading these words? If you're in your 20s and feeling like you should have your life together, but you don't, you can breathe a little easier. Your brain is still becoming what it will be. The confusion is normal. The uncertainty is expected. You're not behind schedule. You're exactly where you should be developmentally. If you're in your 30s and suddenly feel more grounded than you did 5 years ago, you're not imagining it. Your brain has completed a major reorganization. The foundation is set. This is your adult neural architecture, and you can trust it more than you could trust your 25-year-old brain. If you're older and looking back at decisions you made in your teens and 20s, you can extend compassion to your younger self. Those choices weren't made with the brain you have now. They were made with an adolescent brain that was still under construction. And if you're a parent of someone in their late teens or 20s, this research offers a framework for understanding why they may still seem to be figuring things out. They are figuring things out, neurologically as well as experientially. The support and patience you extend during this period isn't coddling, it's developmentally appropriate. The human brain is the most complex structure in the known universe. 3 pounds of tissue containing roughly 86 billion neurons, each forming thousands of connections, creating a network of staggering intricacy. And this structure doesn't spring into existence fully formed. It develops slowly across decades, moving through distinct phases that shape who we become. Understanding these phases, understanding that adolescence extends to 32, that the most dramatic brain reorganization of your life happens in your early 30s, that the architecture stabilizes and then gradually declines, gives us a map for the journey. It doesn't make the journey easier, but it makes it more comprehensible. It replaces judgment with understanding. It replaces expectations with patience. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not failing at adulthood. You are exactly where your brain development says you should be, and that changes everything. If this resonated with you, subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and comment your city below. Let's build a community of people who understand that growing up takes longer than anyone told us, and that's perfectly okay.